The Robinson-McGuinness era of devolution began on Friday in London. And guess what? The First and Deputy First Ministers agreed that they would continue talking to each other in the days and weeks ahead. It's nice to know that the parties running the government here talk to each other, but for some reason the Ulster Unionists and the SDLP aren't impressed. So Reg Empey and Mark Durkan are here to tell me why. Reg Empey, why are you so annoyed about this? Is it because it simply emphasises the point that your parties are marginal to what goes on, whether at Stormont or in London?
No, it's not for that reason at all. The fact is, I said in the House this week that the problems concerning the devolution of policing, justice and other outstanding matters, the problems are here. The problems are in Stormont. The problems are not in London, and the problems are not in
Peter
Dublin.
Robinson said he wants to involve the other parties. Has he invited you to talks this week to sort these things out?
No. And indeed, I made the point also on Thursday that since the executive began on the 8th of May last year, no meeting has taken place between the leaders of the parties that make up that executive. So that's from the 8th of May to now. There hasn't been a single meeting involving the leaders of the parties responsible for forming the government. And when you consider that my own party and the SDLPs together account for nearly 2/3 of the budget that Stormont spends, would you not think it would be sensible to have a meeting of that nature from time to time to set a sort of general direction?
Well, Mark Durkan, how long are you prepared to tolerate this as a party of government being effectively ignored then?
Well, it's not a matter of being effectively ignored. The fact is we have one minister. That minister does her job very well in her own department and tries to participate as strongly as she can within the wider executive. Of course, the executive adopts policies that we don't always agree with, naturally, when we're there in such a small way, and we reflect our differences with those policies. We reflected it in our differences in voting for amending the budget and trying to amend the programme for government, and the validity of our amendments is now very clear to everyone as people see service cuts starting to bite because of the budget squeeze, as people see some of the reviews and the so-called reforms starting to turn into service reduction in a number of key areas, as people see funding for children. We were told children were a priority in this budget. We've seen the Children's Fund disappear. We have seen children's services cut in a whole range of areas, and even the Minister of Education is now saying that the problem is the budget doesn't allow her to even continue the extended schools programme.
Do you think the talks in London achieved anything? Is there a timetable now, do you think, for resolving these outstanding matters? Have you been informed about anything?
Not really. Obviously, certainly not from either Sinn Féin or the DUP. The Prime Minister gives me his version of what is going on, so we'll just have to wait and see. My hunch has always been that the DUP would move on the devolution of justice and policing this calendar year. I think Peter Robinson, and I've said it for a long time, was a good student of the process. I don't think he was going to make the mistake that David Trimble made of vetoing something too long. He was going to assert his authority by completion of the deal. I think Sinn Féin got a sense of that and wanted to be seen to be then pushing the dashboard to claim that they were actually delivering something that was going to happen anyway.
Well, you say the Prime Minister gives you an indication. Have you been speaking to him? Everybody's been talking about this vote at Westminster this week for the 42 days detention and the fact that there are 9 DUP votes up for grabs. There are potential 3 SDLP votes. What have you been saying to Gordon Brown?
Well, we've been making our position very clear. We are opposed to 42-day detention. We're also opposed to what this bill provides for in terms of the coroner's courts, in terms of secret inquests. And
has he tried to persuade you otherwise?
Yes, and obviously the government are trying to tell us that they have put in protections there that meet all the civil liberties arguments. We have looked closely at the government's amendments. We don't think they actually add up to the protections that they claim. And what we're looking at in terms of the coroner's position is essentially a digitally remastered version of the old 1922 Special Powers Act as far as the suppression of inquests is concerned. And there's no way that our party, with our history, celebrating 40 years of civil rights, can vote for anything like that, or for 42-day detention when protections don't work in terms of civil liberties. And it creates a terrible situation for Parliament.
If Gordon Brown still needs your votes, and you say he has the government has been sounding you out about where you're voting, do you think they still need every vote they can get, therefore? I mean, have they considered doing a deal with the DUP, do you think?
That's my sense, and certainly earlier on the government were not ruling out a deal with the DUP. They were straight enough to tell me that they couldn't give me a guarantee that there wouldn't be a deal with the DUP. Whether there will or not, I don't know. But if the DUP do a deal, if Peter Robinson does a deal and says that he gave the vote on the basis of money coming to the executive or consideration of the army bases, then that raises fundamental issues about the executive. Can the DUP do executive business on that sort of basis? It raises fundamental questions for Martin McGuinness and Sinn Féin. Is he prepared to allow the First Minister effectively to unilaterally deal in the executive's interest in something that would be a matter of controversy and difference?
Well, Reg Empey, if every vote counts for Gordon Brown, where does the Ulster Unionist vote? Where does Lady Sylvia Herman stand?
Basically, she's been attempting to get clarification from the Home Secretary for some weeks now without success. She's had further discussions with Paul Goggins, and I know that Number 10 are wanting to know what her position is, and she's still not satisfied. Now, whether in between now and the vote there's any attempt to clarify positions for her remains to be seen. But we've got to remember this is a game of two halves. Even if it passes the Commons stage, it's still got to go to the Lords. And there, I think that it's awaiting a very different fate, whatever happens in the Commons this week. And I think, therefore, this particular piece of legislation, I think, is doomed to have great difficulties getting through the Parliament.
But what we're seeing there at Westminster, surely that's the business of real government. We're seeing a government that's trying to get a controversial policy through, and we're seeing concerted and real opposition from the other benches. It's exactly the sort of thing we're not seeing at Stormont. Is it not time for you to seriously consider moving into opposition?
Well, first of all, it's not a new idea. The current structures don't provide for a formal opposition.
Well, do they need to?
Well, in practice, it would leave you completely isolated outside the system. Now, I think most people, and I went to the polls last year on the basis that we were going to participate in the government, and at least the Ulster Unionist Party told the people the truth before they voted and not waited to slither into government afterwards the way the DUP did. So we told the people we were going in. I think we have to honour that commitment. We have to make every reasonable effort to try and deliver for people.
Is that a guarantee that you'll be in the executive come hell or high water until the next election?
No, it's not a guarantee of that at all, and it cannot be a guarantee of that, because if events and policies are introduced that are such that we couldn't live with them, then no political party can give that sort of an undertaking. But neither do I think people expect at the first sign of difficulty their politicians to walk away and not try and make the effort. We are trying to make the effort. We've difficult portfolios to handle. We will try and deliver for people. But at the end of the day, it depends whether the new First Minister and the Deputy First Minister want to run the executive as it was designed to be run. And unfortunately, the farce on Thursday, where the Assembly gathered merely to witness a signing of a notification of a signing of a piece of paper where we had no right to vote for the First and Deputy First Minister, which was taken away from us by Peter Hain. I think that is the sort of area where we need to correct things, because the wrong impression has been given.
But can you do it, Mark Durkan, without actually moving into opposition? Take an issue, for example, such as the Environmental Protection Agency. The DUP minister has ruled out setting one up, despite the fact that all the other parties want one. Every interest group outside of Stormont says Northern Ireland needs one, and therefore you could effectively say that's an example of democracy not functioning well. There is no opposition to say there should be one.
Yeah, and that's why a number of parties have used a petition to refer that matter back to the executive, and that's a matter that will continue to play inside the Assembly. And going back to the point I made about the budget and the programme for government, a number of people at that time, including media people who gave us very heated interviews at the time, were suggesting that we did not have the right as a party to vote against the budget or to table amendments. We do have that right. The Ministerial Code puts obligations on ministers. It doesn't bind parties. We stood by our manifesto. We stand by it on environmental protection. We stand by it in terms of the budget, in terms of the principles and priorities that we want in a programme for government. And that's what people want to see. And we can do that by still having a minister and still
but
do
doesn't
it.
The fact
if people make it impossible
DUP
for us to do it, then obviously a different decision will then have to be made in the future. But we're not trying to engineer that situation.
But if they continue to ignore you and have talks in Downing Street without you and don't involve you and have any meeting with any of the leaders of the other parties, are you going to continue to endure that kind of treatment?
Well, we will continue to challenge and criticise where that is needed. Where First and Deputy First Minister or the Executive do things that deserve support, we will give them that support. Where they do things that need criticism and where they're failing to do things and need challenged, that's what we will provide as well. That's our mandate. That's what people want to see from parties in the Assembly.
Mark Durkan, Sir Reg Empey, thank you both very much indeed.